This is Chris Carlson, and welcome to the Boulder Banking Podcast. My guest is John Day, President and CEO of First Security Bank in Oklahoma City. I know you will love this episode as John tells the story of how the bank became a Minority Depository Institution, the importance of the bank in the OKC community, and he also shares how the best job interview he ever had eventually led him to his current role as President and CEO of First Security Bank. John, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
John, you have a great story to tell about First Security Bank. But before we get to that story, give us a brief background of John Day.
Well, the other story is better than mine for sure. And so, but thanks for asking and thanks for having me on. I'm really humbled that we were asked, and I'm glad that people might be interested in what we have to share. I am not a lifetime banker. I started in banking when I was about 41 years old. I'm about 53 now. I had a really wide background in business. I had been in sales and services. I've been in some manufacturing, done some quality control, and had run some different types of businesses, which basically gave me a lot of really good transferable experience to work with small businesses. You know, I understood the business cycle and understood the pressures that managers and principals and owner operators experience. And so that served me really well coming in to a small community bank. And so, but right before I came here, I worked for about 4 years in a small private equity firm. That sounds like it would have been really cool. It was very educational. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done at the time. And most of the time I felt like I was under the bus, but I was learning a lot. That's where I learned some of my accounting. That's where I learned how to read my tax returns and really kind of helped me to do some of the higher level underwriting that we have to do when we're looking at nested entities and different things like that. And so that was super helpful. And so in August of 2010, that's when First Security generously hired me as a vice president of lending. And I came in and really loved it. And our management and our board wisely began to invest in my training. And so I think I would be a banker less than a month before I started the basic banking class over at the Oklahoma Bankers Association. And so I won the award for being the newest banker in the room at that point. So they put me through all that training and then sent me to the Graduate School of Banking in Colorado. I graduated there class of 2015. So shout out to all of my classmates from the class of 2015. And GSBC changed my life, exposed me to so much, and really kind of lit a fire for me for community banking and what we have to offer. And then in January of 2020, about 6 weeks before, or 2.5 months really before COVID hit, I was promoted to president and CEO here at First Security Bank. And so that may be more than you wanted to know, but that's a brief background.
Well, John, to your point, it's a atypical journey to become a president and CEO of a bank, but it's an interesting one nonetheless.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my journey. It kind of is what it is. And I'm super grateful for obviously the men and women of our board and shareholders for having that kind of confidence and faith in me. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, John, tell us a little bit about First Security Bank, maybe a little bit of its legacy, what it looks like today, and who it serves today.
First Security Bank is a single branch state chartered community bank. We are located in Oklahoma City, but specifically and importantly on the northeast quadrant of Oklahoma City. It's an area locally that we refer to as the East Side. So our surrounding neighborhood is predominantly African American. And so this whole area has got a lot of history behind it. The East Side actually was the second home really for African Americans in Oklahoma City back in the early 1900s. There is what is now and back then even a very historic district near downtown Oklahoma City called Deep Deuce. And that is where during segregation, that's where African Americans lived. And it was a vibrant community there with a lot of jazz, a lot of thriving businesses down there. Then around the 1940s, 1950s, as the core of Oklahoma City began to grow, African Americans just kind of got pushed out. You know, there's a gentleman on our board, Chris, that reminds us that from time to time, he says, it looks like we're in a situation where we can jump or be pushed. But either way, we've got to go. And sadly, I think that was kind of the situation for African Americans at that time. And many African Americans relocated to the eastern suburb of Oklahoma City, which is now the East Side. And the East Side itself has got a really interesting history. It's like there are two gentlemen on my board that were young boys on the East Side. First Security Bank is located on a east-west street that runs all the way through Oklahoma City metropolitan area from the far west all the way to the far east side where we are. And we're on 23rd Street. Well, back in the day, African Americans could not live north of certain east-west streets. I think one of the boundaries at the time, and I'll probably get this wrong, I apologize, but one of those northern boundaries was 8th Street. They will tell stories about how you better not go north of this street. And they remember times when they were just needed to get south again because it was safer for them. And so, but they'll also tell the story of, how African Americans over time began to safely acquire residence further and further north. And then, over time, north at Northeast 23rd Street, obviously where the bank is located. And that was terrific for African Americans because they really felt a sense of ownership. Like we've got a great bank here on Northeast 23rd. And we've been here for over almost 75 years now. So that's a little bit of our history. As far as what our bank looks like now, size wise, we've got about 75 million in assets currently. That's due to a capital injection that I'm happy to talk about here a little bit later that we're just really very thrilled about. That the United States Treasury helped us with. We have 22 full-time equivalent employees. Our staff is really diverse, about 81% female, about 60 to 61% minority employees here with us. Our management team, about 57% of our management team is female, and half of our senior management team here are minorities. And so we think that we're kind of walking the talk when it comes to where our people are. And as far as the folks that we serve, our depositor mix varies widely from, our local residents, some of whom definitely would be qualified to be considered as low to moderate income residents near our bank. But then, depositors also range to, larger engineering firms and a local career tech organization, a borrower mix. We really kind of focus on what we would call growth stage companies that are generally run by owner operators. And we focus on our CRE and residential investment properties. That's kind of our lane currently, Chris.
Well, John, can you explain to our audience what a MDI is?
An MDI is an abbreviation for Minority Depository Institution. The FDIC defines an MDI. They really have two different definitions. The first one is how First Security is qualified as an MDI, and that's where 51% or more of the voting stock is owned by minority individuals. The second qualification to be an MDI is where a majority of the directors is minority, and the community that the institution serves is predominantly minority. And so we're the former, where 51% or more of our voting stock is minority. And, we're one of about 143 MDIs in the United States, I think through the end of 2021, about 143. And so just in context, that's relative to about, 3% of community banks. So we're a very small constituency, and we have a really, really big job. I did some research, Chris, and I determined from some really great information from the FDIC that the median total asset size for an MDI in the country is about 400 million. And so that's the median. So you've got some that are, as small as First Security at 75, and then you have some that are really, really, multiple $billion in assets. And so their sizes, asset sizes range really, really widely. And there can be some really, really exciting banks to look at.
Well, can you walk us through the journey First Security Bank went through to become an MDI?
Yeah, I will. And some of that obviously is confidential and private, but I think it's a beautiful story to kind of talk about the kind of the character of our bank. And when I came to the bank in 2010, we had shareholders who were minorities who owned a significant amount of stock, but a majority of the shares weren't minority owned at that time. So when I came here, the bank was not already an MDI. And then in about 2017, 2018, sometime in there, one of our shareholders, white shareholders, volunteered to sell a portion of his shares to our minority shareholders to specifically allow the bank to become an MDI. And obviously, this is a really selfless thing for this individual to do. It's an admirable act, but I would also say that, what I think we're going to be able to tell is that ultimately that might be the most important decision ever made in the history of our bank was to become an MDI because of some of the leverage from the Treasury that we were able to receive here about 2 months ago. So we can talk about that later, but that was our journey. So it was, it kind of happened very quietly. We all knew that something had happened that was very important to us as an organization. But it was several years later before we really began to see the upside of that financially.
Well, John, you mentioned the FDIC a moment ago. How does the FDIC champion MDIs?
Well, the FDIC has been super for First Security Bank. And, as a state chartered bank, though, I needed to pause to take a little commercial just to, sidebar to say it should not go without saying we get a ton of support from our state banking department. Our commissioner, Mick Thompson, is an amazing advocate for all of his banks. And we here at First Security have definitely benefited by his hard work, his advocacy, and his leadership. And so I think if you talk to any state chartered bank in Oklahoma, they would say something similar to that about our state organization. But if your question was about the FDIC, and I honestly can't say enough about just how encouraging that they've been. I mean, when you're a 50, 60, 70 million asset size bank and you're having to compete for loans and talent and all of that stuff, it's like you've got your work cut out for you, right? And so every interaction that we've had with the FDIC since we've become an MDI, continually, genuinely offering their support in terms of technical assistance, training, different things like this. And they really, really have followed through. Like, for example, for us, we hired somebody here to help lead in our operations. And this particular individual was immensely qualified in all the areas. And, community bankers out there will know, like, if you work at a community bank, you're going to wear like 17 different hats, right? Well, he wore, 16 of those hats when he showed up, but he didn't have any IT experience. And so the FDIC arranged some training for that we would have had to pay for if we would have had to send him to some kind of school. And that was terrific. And then they also really jumped in repeatedly. We had to upgrade our BSA program and work that needed to be done. And it was just time for an upgrade. And they gave us a lot of technical assistance there and were super patient and didn't pull any punches. And granted, FDIC is not a consulting firm, right? They're not going to tell you how to do specific things, but they've been really, really terrific in that sense. And so they've been a super champion of ours.
Well, what impact does the MDI have in Oklahoma City specifically?
I'll talk about Oklahoma City and kind of what our experience has been. But, for the listeners, nationally, MDIs, and again, I don't speak for all MDIs, but what MDIs generally do is they generally serve communities where there's a higher percentage of residents that are minorities and or live in low to moderate income LMI census tracts. And so as a general characteristic, these areas are underserved financially, both on the consumer side as well as on a commercial basis. And so it's MDIs that have got really a specific charge and mission to serve the underserved, particularly in minority and LMI census tracts and other types of populations. And so that's where we find ourselves kind of in the macro. In the micro, I was looking at some of our loan data, and we're tracking our metrics differently now that this is being an MDI and serving minority communities is becoming more cool than it has been in the past. And we're really having a good time with it, actually. We're having a lot of impact. But I was looking at some of our metrics, and over the last 3 years, our loans to what's called other targeted populations, or to create a direct benefit for low to moderate income populations, we loan about 53% of our loans to 60% or 66% of our originations for the last 3 years went to those areas. 2019 through 2021, 53% of our loans went to that type of lending. And we're sitting right now with an ROA of about 1.3, ROE at somewhere just over 10%. And so, what that has meant for us operationally is that we do a lot of good loans to LMI minority base. And sometimes those aren't very large loans. So we've got to really hustle to bring in some other larger earning assets to supplement that. But that's just, by now, that's just real normal for us. That's just kind of what we do. But another example that we're really proud of is our performance during the round of PPP loans. Over 2020 and 2021, 95% of our loans went to minorities, Asian Americans, African Americans, and that's something that we will be really proud of for a long, long time. Really pleased with that performance. And we went big. We decided we went a lot bigger the second year than we did the first year. But overall, we ended up doing about almost $18 million in PPP loans. And to put that in some context, that's about 250% of our total capital, because there are some banks that, were nervous about it and understandably. I mean, the SBA, God love them, they had a tiger by the tail trying to roll that thing out. And anybody that did the PPP loans knew that it was a rodeo. But, our average loan side was about, it's about $10,000. So we did a ton of small loans that, according to the metrics that the SBA gave us, it retained about 2,200 jobs here in Oklahoma City. So for a bank at the time, that was about 65 million in assets. We're really pleased with the impact of that had.
That's an awesome testament about, the job, saving that many jobs is critical in a very unusual time in our economy, obviously.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. It was a very odd situation that we found ourselves in to serve our community.
Tell us the story of how you became president of the bank. I think you told me it was the best job interview you've ever had.
Yes, I did, Chris. That is exactly what it was. And so, sure. So at the time, I was still working at the private equity company, and I knew that it was time for me to make a move. And I had a good friend that had done some subcontracting work for that private equity firm that was a long timer, a lifer here at First Security. And so he and I really hit it off, and he really kind of became the bridge for me to get into banking. So he arranged the interview. And so my first interview with the president of the bank, the CEO of the bank, he had looked at my resume, and we're at lunch, and it's white tablecloths and the whole thing. And it was a great lunch and had a great conversation. And then honestly, it was early in the conversation. It was like 30% of the way, like a third of the way through the conversation. This gentleman who's been a mentor to me in banking now for the last 12 years, he looks across the table at me and he says, John, I'm looking for someone to take over for me as president when I retire. Now understand, I'm not even worked a single day in banking. I'm in a job that I'm really kind of ready to leave. And here I am in first interview, hearing from the CEO words that sound like I'm also interviewing to be the next president of this bank. So, I kind of choke on my chicken there and I'm mulling this over in my head. And then so as things are wrapping up, it's like, well, thanks for meeting with us today. And, do you have any questions for us? And it was like, yeah, could we circle back? I thought I heard you say something that rhymes with, you're looking for someone to take over for you as president when you retire. And he said, that's absolutely what I said. So then I asked some questions about people here in the bank and other types of things. Because one, that was thrilling for me, but it also was a little bit concerning. Like, is there anyone else here? And, but the truth is that was not a problem at all. It was exactly the right move that he needed to be looking to make. And so I walked from that. I said, you say the only thing that you can say at that point is thank you for clarifying that. And I look forward to our next conversation. And then, you take 5, maybe 10 steps outside the restaurant on your way to the car. And, I'm calling my wife and I'm like, you're not going to believe the conversation that I just had. And, sure enough, it's worked out well. It's not been without its challenges, of course, and, as any business has, but that's how I, but then I was hired on as a lender. So the staff had a good almost 9 years to get to know me and me get to know banking, and that's for us to work together before I was promoted to president. So that's how that worked out.
I think that qualifies as a great job interview.
Thank you, Chris. I think it does. I think it does, and so it's a fun story to tell.
All right, John. So here's my elephant in the room question.
Yes.
Are people surprised that a white dude is president of a minority-owned bank?
Sometimes they are, but I get this question a lot, and it's a question that honestly I've asked myself and I've asked my shareholders and directors before, and so yeah, I do get that question, and I've asked it myself. Internally, it works for us, and so let me just begin, by making kind of this disclaimer that all MDIs are different. And I certainly don't speak for, presume to know how other MDIs are led or governed. And I'm only able to speak from our shared experience here at First Security Bank on the east side of Oklahoma City, and in obviously the larger Oklahoma City community. And, I respect the fact that there are folks out there who believe that maybe an African-American owned bank should be run exclusively by African-Americans, staffed entirely by African-Americans, serve predominantly African-American consumers and businesses. And my education is ongoing, but I do have a little bit of an idea about the long history of Black banks in our country. And I completely understand. I can't say I completely understand. I think I have an idea of where that position's come from. And I understand that, but it's just that my board, my shareholders, and I just take a different view for that. And frequently, Chris, that question or that concern really comes from a question of who's in control, who's in control of the Black bank, and then they look at a white president and CEO, and so. In those cases, I kind of can discern that, and sometimes you can discern that. In those cases, I just try to gently and respectfully remind or inform them whenever that issue gets raised that, my bosses are African American in the majority. And it does set some context of this, because there's always a bigger picture. Obviously, you've got to be able to do the work, and you've got to be able to hold the trust of the people that you serve and that you work with. But I'd like to share something, because I tend to ask African Americans that I trust about their reflection on that, about how they would answer that question. There's a gentleman on my board that gave me this great thought that was encouraging to me, because obviously I love my job, and I see it as a vocation, and I'm grateful to be where I am, and we're making a lot of really good change. But one of the things that he said to me, and I'm not going to quote him because I would get it wrong, but in essence, this was my takeaway from what he said. And he said something like, John, he said, if we as Americans are going to espouse diversity really seriously, then surely there's room for a qualified person who also happens to be white to lead a minority-owned institution. Obviously, I happen to agree, not because he's talking specifically about my job, but here's a man that is very in tune with all those types of issues. And so it's something that I realize that I'm a steward of the trust of a lot of people. when I said that my education is ongoing, it's like I've got a stack of books that I'm trying to read, and some of which I have read, and it's changing my life and changing my perspective. And it's a process for me of evolving who I am, how I see the world, and how I lead. And I'm grateful, really grateful in my 50s to have this opportunity, and hopefully will for a long time.
So, John, why are you so passionate about your role at First Security Bank?
I think I, hinted at this a little earlier when we had spoke last week, the week before, and I've got a couple of things that we are constantly aiming at and pushing higher and higher. It's my belief, what I want to do for the rest of my life is pursue two things simultaneously in our business. I want to pursue high profits and a high purpose. High profits and a high purpose. And I talk about this sometime at our board, and I talk about this with our staff. It's like, we cannot be ashamed to make a lot of money. We're capitalists. And as community bankers, we are in a unique position to be proud of and exercise the instrument of capitalism. I've got a dear friend who's the president of a bank in North Dakota. I won't say her name because she'd be embarrassed, but you know who you are. We talked recently, and she just said, John, community bank it's all about this, right? And she had taken her hands and she put her hands over her heart. Not to be sentimental, but all of us, I think, that are community banks, whether you're in a rural area and you realize that you're kind of the glue that holds that economy together, or wherever your market is, it's like community bankers are capitalists with a heart for their communities. We've got to be very serious about making money because we are just as serious about our mission, wherever that is. And so back to the high purpose and high profits. I mean, if you've got one without the other, you've got some kind of dysfunction. If you've got a high purpose and low profits, well, we all know organizations that could fit that kind of interpretation or that kind of model with high profits and low purpose, and generally, high purpose. I'm confusing that. I apologize. High purpose and low profits. It's like they just kind of tend to preach to the choir. They've got a big vision and no money to get it done. There's no resources. And so those are just, sometimes it's kind of embarrassing to see that, right? And on the other hand, you've got organizations with high profits and low purpose. After a while, that whole experience can become very soulless. But when you pair high profits with high purpose, and your board is engaged with, absolutely, we are here for XYZ, whatever the vision is for your bank, whatever the purpose is for your bank, whatever the mission is, the why that you guys get up and do, whatever it is that you're trying to cultivate and develop in your particular market. When you begin to realize, well, there's a really powerful synergy here between high purpose and high profits. And we explicitly talk about that. And obviously, I talk about making money and high profits. I'm absolutely talking about doing that in ways that are innovative, ethical, sustainable ways that our grandparents would be proud of, right? And so we've got an opportunity here in Oklahoma City to be the bridge, to build bridges, to be the connecting point to help businesses and families move from where they are to where they need to be, where they want to be, where they would never be able to get to without a financial ally like First Security Bank or, other community banks here in our country. And so what I would say is this. I would also say that if you're listening today, and thanks for that too, right, Chris, listening to the podcast. If you're listening today and you don't have a plan in your business and in your bank to reach out to minority-owned businesses, I highly encourage you to spend some time thinking about that. Because what all of the business books will tell us is the best way to make money is to hit a market that's underdeveloped, undeveloped, or underserved, be really good at it, and be the solution to problems there. And that's what we're doing here. That's what MBIs are doing across the United States. And what I've found, and yes, particularly on the loans and everything else, as you would in any other line of business, you've got to get the underwriting right. You've got to get it priced ethically. But in my experience, our growth stage minority clients are great performers. They're intensely loyal. They refer a lot of business. And frequently that's because they've tried to go into the bank down the street, and no one's taken the time to show them how to do this very basic types of banking, lending processes that are necessary for them to get the financial capital that they need for them to run their business. And so for me, there's this ongoing process of discovery and facilitation and providing resources and accountability that is beginning to really see some flourishing here in Oklahoma City through our work together at First Security Bank.
Well, what does the future look like for First Security Bank?
We're really very excited about our future. I would imagine you would expect me to say that, but let me kind of break down. I've alluded a couple of times to some funding that we'd received through the United States Treasury, and it's really been a total game changer for us. 2021, our bank applied to the United States Treasury under a program called the Emergency Capital Investment Program. And for short, that is the ECIP, Emergency Capital Investment Program. It's the ECIP program. And that ECIP program was only offered to MDIs and community development financial institutions. So MDIs and CDFIs were the only types of FIs that were able to apply for these funds. And you had to demonstrate that you have a history of lending into low to moderate income areas, underserved areas, other target populations, different things like this. And we applied. We had some help and some advocates as we went through that process that we'll be forever grateful for. And we were awarded a massive amount of capital relative to our size. That's why I was pointing back to the decision by one of our shareholders to make the changes that we would become an MDI. Because at the time that we got this capital funding, so what we ended up getting a long-term subordinated debenture capital loan from the Treasury to our holding company. We're a subchapter S company. At the time, the day before we closed that particular loan, total capital was approximately only about $7 million. So my concentration limit for a loan was about $1.6 million. That's the biggest loan that we could make. We were approved for a capital investment of just over $15 million. So that obviously almost tripled the size of our capital, took my concentration limit, from 1.6 to about 1.7 to about 5.6, overnight. That completely changed the outlook for how we can compete in our city, and gave us the ballast in the boat to grow our bank over time, prudently, all of these things that, you want to hear a bank president say, to an asset size of somewhere around $250 million. And so, this morning we woke up at 75 million, and, we realized that we've got a real bright future. So we've been sitting on this reality for about 60 days now. I got to be honest, we kind of felt like the dog that caught the car. And so we're having good conversations about what we want to do. But, initially what our future is we want to just stay true to our mission, Chris. It's like we're building on our solid fundamentals of banking, prudent loan growth, innovative and solid deposit growth. We're securing our staff, and, together as a board and our shareholders, we're beginning to, reimagine what our future might look like for us. So we're very excited about it, and tune in. Greater things to come.
Well, John, you shared some great ideas and some great stories. If somebody has a question and maybe wants to have a deeper conversation about you and or MDI or what you're doing at First Security Bank, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, and I appreciate that people might want to speak with me. Let me be really clear that I am very eager to talk to other people that may be working in this space of minority business development. We are eager to learn about what product, what programs that you've got, what solutions do you have, what kind of partnerships do you have with the people in the community that are being effective for you guys, and be happy to kind of share what we do. But really, I'd love to hear from other bankers that are in that kind of space as well. But feel free to email me. My email is John Day, my full name, JOHNDAY, at FSB, like First Security Bank, OKC, like Oklahoma City.com. So John Day at FSBOKC.com. You can also reach me through our website with the same domain name. Hopefully this has been informative and maybe encouraging to some folks. But the truth is, I would love to maybe out of this, I could be selfish a little bit. I'd love to make some strategic partnerships and friendships with other bankers who are in a similar line of business.
Well, John, I know you wear many hats, which causes you to be very busy. I want to thank you for taking time out of that busy schedule to join us today.
Chris, it's been an honor to do this. And let me know if there's anything else that I can do to help in the future.
Thanks now.
Thank you, sir.